Now, this is the 10th round of talks since tensions began between the two countries at the LAC last April. Now, we know disengagement has taken place in the Galwan Valley and Pangong Tso, but certain other friction points remain. And from what we understand, China seems to be dragging its feet. So what will be India's approach when these talks happen tomorrow? That's what Snehesh Philip, who tracks defense for ThePrint, will help us understand in this episode of Government Matters. So do start sending in your questions. Snehesh, so you've also written a story which you can log on to our website, theprint.in. It's a comprehensive story to know where exactly we stand as far as disengagement at the LAC is concerned. But if you can just walk us through where disengagement has taken place so far and what are the friction points that remain?
Well, the disengagement has taken place as agreed by both sides on the southern and the northern banks of Pangong. So this has been covered, as you're all well aware of. Following that, the disengagement, the last round of talks was held on the 20th of February. And at that time, the understanding was that both India and China have reached more or less understanding on further disengagement at the Gogrand hot spring area. Of course, the issue of Demchok as well as the issue of the Depsang plains continue to remain. But then these are legacy issues. These are these issues date back prior to what happened in April last year. But remember that when we are talking about disengagement in Gogrand hot spring area, remember that this is the third attempt at disengagement. The first attempt at disengagement was done way back in May last year, and there was a clash that took place in Galwan. You're well aware of that. Galwan clash happened as a result because of China's reluctance to implement the the disengagement process that was decided upon at that time. After that, following the Galwan clash, there was also a next round of disengagement process that was agreed to, under which the Chinese were supposed to pull back from the Galwan Valley and from the Gogrand hot spring area where they intruded into what the Chinese claim is their territory, and what India sees it is as its territory because it comes within India's perception.
Right.
Now, while the Chinese moved out completely from the Galwan Valley, they've pulled back and that area has become a no-go area, or you can say a buffer zone. The Chinese did not withdraw completely from the Gogrand hot spring area. So what essentially happened in Gogrand hot spring is that the Chinese, for example, in Gogra, the Chinese had come in about 3 kilometers inside India's perception of the LAC. Now, when I say the Chinese had come in, this was a small group of Chinese soldiers. You could say a platoon strength of Chinese soldiers who had come, and they had set up camps. Those camps, temporary camps. These camps are for the soldiers to stay. So, but what mattered was the fact that in the rear, that is within their own territory, the Chinese had amassed large number of troops, which are acting as the back for these troops who had intruded about 3 kilometers inside the Indian territory. The same happened in the Gogrand hot spring area, where the Chinese dominated the Petrol Point 17 and Petrol Point 17 Alpha or 17A. Now, following the decision taken in May, the Chinese were supposed to withdraw. The Chinese did withdraw. However, they still left behind a section, at least a section strength of troops in the Indian territory. So they didn't fully move out.
Right.
And hence the negotiation. And then, of course, India took the countermeasures in the southern banks, and then things escalated and things came to a standstill.
Right. Now, Snehesh, as you've written in your story, China seems to be dragging its feet as far as these other points are concerned. So what would be India's approach in tomorrow's talks? What can we expect from these talks, to put it simply?
Well, as I said, the general feeling that came out from the 20th February meeting was that both sides had agreed to the disengagement process in Gogrand hot spring while the talks continued for Depsang and Demchok. Now, the talks was held on the 20th. The understanding reached was that both sides will get back to the higher authorities and will meet again. So the Indian side did, the China study group met. They discussed the outcome of the talks and further directions were given. I'm sure the Chinese would have done at their level also. But the Chinese never came back with dates.
Right.
So it is only now, tomorrow, that is on April 9, that the fresh talks, the next round of talks are being held. So there's a huge gap that has
Right.
come in between, which clearly tends to show that the Chinese, are okay with wherever they are. They're
Right.
okay with the situation. They are in no hurry
To change the status quo.
change the status quo, resolve this particular standoff, or resolve the tensions. So that is the thing.
Okay. So this question from Ashish Chawla, let me begin with that. How realistic is it to expect from the Indian side that they would accept the 1959 China claim line in the talks on Depsang and Gogra Hot Springs, since we are still not able to patrol those areas?
See, as far as the 1959 claim lines and whatever claim lines that the Chinese and various people talk about is concerned, I can tell you for the fact that the Indian side and the military. I mean, the military is absolutely clear that it is not letting go of any claims that it has. In Depsang Plains, they never patrolled. In Depsang, for example, you have to understand there is then the LAC, and then you have patrolling points, the PP. The PPs are actually away from the LAC. They are much into the Indian side. As far as Depsang is concerned, the Indian army is seeking the patrolling rights back to PP10, PP11, PP11A, PP12, PP13. In Gogra, it is PP15. In Hot Spring area, it is PP17 and 17 Alpha. So, as far as the Indian army is concerned, they are seeking they are seeking restoration of the patrolling rights to this area. Now, there are multiple ways of looking at things. I'm just being the devil's advocate here.
Right.
It's just a saying. I'm not saying anybody is a devil or not. But the fact is that the China, for example, let's say in Depsang Plains, India has a patrolling point. India claims to a particular area. The Chinese have, as of now, are objecting to India's patrolling there. Similarly, Chinese also have patrolling claims, which India has also stopped. So it is both ways. Of course, the fact is that this particular situation is disadvantage to India, not
To China.
advantage India.
Right, okay. Shakti Kumar, what are the bargaining chips that India could go to the talks with or will go to the talks with? Are there tactical military opportunities like the Kailash range? In fact, you've mentioned about the Kailash range in your story as well.
Yeah, see, as far as tactical advantage, I'll be very frank. I'm not really sure about what tactical advantage that Indian army or the Indian side has when they go in for this fresh round of negotiations. The earlier tactical advantage that we had was the fact that Indians had occupied the southern banks of Pangong, so the Kailash range. This was something that the Chinese were really uncomfortable with. The Chinese wanted to withdraw. At that time, yes, we did have the tactical advantage. Both sides, both India and China, have now withdrawn from the Kailash range. I'm not really sure, what exactly is the tactical advantage as far as India is going in with, as far as the fresh rounds of talks are concerned.
Okay, Akriti, does the US have a role or say in this?
The US has no role or say in the negotiations that is happening between India and China. Of course, there is what has happened, or the fallout of this Chinese aggression is the fact that you have a closer relationship that is taking place between India and the US. You also have the Quad countries doing an exercise, coming together and doing an exercise while the standoff was on. The standoff is still on when the Quad plus, it's a very loose term that I'm using, Quad plus, where you have the Quad countries, that is India, US, Japan and Australia, exercising together with actually the French. The French have also sent, so the exercise is happening as we speak. So, there are large number of dynamics that have changed, but of course, no third country has a say in what happens between India and China.
Okay, this is from a handle called Nature Desai. Only Snehesh has mentioned in one of his articles about the standoff in Demchok. Do you know about the specific location where it is exactly happening?
See, as far as the specific locations, I'll come back to you on the specific location. But Demchok, again, you'll have to see, as I said earlier, it's a legacy issue. Demchok is something that both sides have been claiming for a very long time. This particular Demchok is actually, we reported it in February when the talks were held. That's when we came to know that besides, of course, Gogra and the Hot Spring and Depsang that has been talked about, Demchok was also an issue that is being discussed.
Okay. Gurbani, what is your view about the reports about the movement of the Chinese PLA ground forces into the plains of Aksai Chin, which according to sources appears to be a preparation for their annual summer drills?
See, as far as the movement, the Chinese, the Aksai Chin, even though India claims that the Aksai Chin is their territory illegally occupied by China, the fact is that the Chinese control the Aksai Chin territory. There are multiple movements that take place on the Chinese side. Similarly, there are movements taking place on the Indian side too. So you will also have movements taking place. For example, when the whole the standoff happened, the India had pushed in nearly 40,000 additional troops into Ladakh, and these were not just troops; these were also equipment. You had the APCs, you had the tanks, you had various other artillery regiments that were moved in. So the movement happens on both sides. I think one good, one positive fallout of what has happened between India and China is that the Indian army and the Indian establishment is now more China focused. So we are observing movements closely, the movements that are happening on the other side, not just along the LAC, but what China is doing with other countries also in the region. So it's something that is being kept track of.
Okay, Viren, do you think there will be a war between India and China? It's been almost a year, I think in every government matters I get this question, a similar question.
See, I always say that, and this was something that I maintained earlier also, that I don't think so China is looking at war at this particular moment. I'm not ruling out what happens in the future, but the fact is that China, even when this standoff happened, China was not really looking into escalating it beyond the situation. But I can tell you for the fact that China also did not expect India to stand up so strongly. So when, the Chinese moved in, there was a counter deployment from India, then there was a counter deployment from China. So one thing led to the other, to a particular, standoff that happened. So I strongly believe that China was not looking at a war, but yes, it was also indeed surprised by the Indian response to it, not just in the southern banks of the Pangong Tso, where the Indians actually outflanked the Chinese and took them by surprise, but also in Galwan. Now, yes, India did lose 20 soldiers, but the fact is that the Chinese also suffered casualties. And while the China has officially claimed death of 4 soldiers during the various level of talks, the Chinese have at multiple occasions given unofficial figures from casualties ranging from 3 to 15. So the Chinese did suffer casualties, and it was the first time in years that the Chinese have suffered casualties. They are not used to getting casualties. So yes, the Chinese did had the element of surprise with them. They did move in. But the fact is that India counter deployed. The Chinese were taken by surprise, but I don't think so. The Chinese were ever looking at having a full-scale war, or even a limited war with India.
Okay, Kalyan Kaushik, where are we currently standing on the Depsang Plains petroling issue? Any update on this, as DBO is pretty close to the area?
Well, the situation in Depsang continues to remain as it was April last year, as it was October 2019, as it was April 2019, because as I said, the situation in Depsang is actually a legacy issue. It dates back prior to what happened in 2020 in Ladakh. Remember, I was actually speaking to a senior officer in the establishment, and my question, to this particular officer was what exactly was happening in Depsang. So, we've done a story explaining what has happened there. Please log on to our website and do read. But he told me one thing, and he said, boss, if India wants to move ahead and push through and get those petroling rights back, India can very well do so. But then this would lead to an escalation of the situation.
Right.
India is not looking at escalation of situation. So, the Depsang Plains is something which has been talked about both at the military as well as at the diplomatic level.
Okay, Bhaskar D also had a question on progress at the Depsang Valley, but you've already taken that. There's a question from Rajesh. I'll just ask the crux of his question. Does India trust China?
Well, India, of course, does not trust China, and I'm sure after this, no one really trusts China. I think, it was actually one of the earlier cut the clutter shows, by our editor-in-chief Sheikh Gupta, in which he had mentioned that the trust deficit between India and China has gone back to what existed in 1962.
After the war.
1962 is when of course you're aware that when China attacked India, there was a war, and the trust deficit had really come down. It took a lot of time, lot of years for China to build back a trust with India. So while India was focused on development, economic ties with China, there was a lot of Chinese investments were coming in. This backstabbing by the Chinese have now led to a trust deficit, and rightly so. It is actually good that there is a trust deficit, and also a rebalance of India's focus from its western borders to its borders in the north and the east.
Okay, this is from RJA Dai. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. How much power does China have on Russia supplying S-400 protection to India?
How much
power does China have on Russia supplying S-400 protection to India?
I have not understood the question.
I think this means that does China have an influence on Russia as far as supplying S-400 to India is concerned?
See, you'll have to see, there is no denying of the fact that the relationship between China and Russia is becoming stronger and stronger every day. But the fact is that Russia has already made it clear that it is not entering into any military alliance with China. However, Russia is concerned with India's growing ties with the US. But as far as China's say in any S-400 delivery is concerned, I would say there is zilch. The S-400 delivery will happen as per schedule. I can also tell you for the fact that during this particular standoff, it was actually Russia among other countries which won emergency contracts for the supply of certain kind of equipment and ammunition equipment and ammunition, which some of which have already been delivered. Right. So while the standoff with China was happening.
Okay. Vignesh Kunar, is China's aggression on the Indian border because of Amit Shah's statement that we will take POK anytime soon? What's your view on that? And also, of course, we know how the Home Minister spoke about getting Aksai Chin.
I was just about to say, I think you meant Home Minister's comment about Aksai Chin. See, you can't take the entire about what has happened between India and China since April last year in context of just one statement by the Home Minister. The Home Minister did make a statement, but the fact is that there were multiple reasons that led to this particular standoff, that led to this aggression by China. There was the fact that there is an increased pace of border infrastructure development by India. The BRO is doing a tremendous job. The Chinese have been surprised by this. There was a COVID situation that was there. There was growing ties with the US that was also a concern for China. So I think there was a multiple factors that came into play. So you can't really pinpoint and say, just because Amit Shah had made the statement, the Chinese came in, or just because India had, fastened his infrastructure development border, the Chinese came in. So there were multiple factors that came into play.
Okay, I'll take this last question from Ankit Nakashane. How is India countering, or how can India counter China's increasing defense expenditure considering the size of our economy?
Well, see, as far as, it's anybody would be a fool to even think of matching China's defense spending. Now, China's defense spending, there are two aspects to China's defense spending. One is the official Chinese defense spending, which is a published figure. Then there is the unofficial, defense spending. For example, if you the amount of the speed at which the China is spending on defense and is churning out equipment after the equipment. For example, if you take the example of Navy itself, I think over the last 10 years, the Chinese have added an entire Indian Navy to its fleet in terms of
the numbers
that they have come out with. So there is no way that India can ever, at least for the next several years, match China's defense spending. But what India needs to do is, rather than trying to match China's defense spending, India needs to follow its own policy and follow its own target of what it wants to achieve to counter the Chinese aggression. So yes, that is something that is already in the works. So if somebody even wants India to match China's defense spending, I would say no, it should not happen. Rather than matching China's defense expenditure, India should focus on its own abilities and capabilities and how we can actually counter the Chinese by spending judiciously.
Okay, there are many questions. Unfortunately, because of paucity of time, we couldn't take. There's a question from Sakish, Basu, Ashish Chavla, Abhishek Khadanga, many other questions. My apologies, we're running out of time, but next time, of course. Snehesh, thank you for explaining what's happening at the LAC and what we can expect from the co-commander level talks tomorrow. Thank you for watching Government Matters and for sending in your questions.
Thank you.